Now, this week is International Fraud Awareness Week, so let's look at the extent of fraud committed by employees. Christo Snyman, CEO of forensic investigative services company CS Forensics, is online to discuss this with us. Christo, thank you so much for joining us. Now, South Africa is no stranger to fraud, but let's look at the prevalence of fraud by employees in the country. And could you give us some examples of this type of fraud?
Hi, Melissa, and good afternoon to all the viewers. Yes, if I can kick off, employee fraud is very likely the most common fraud of financial crime in South Africa. And just to put it a bit in perspective, if we look at the recent Association Certified Fraud Examiners Global Fraud Report, the ACFE is an organization that provides training and education to its members. Now, what this fraud did was it did a study of employee fraud globally. So they looked at over 2,000 cases globally and over 400 cases in sub-Saharan Africa, including South Africa. And what this study found was that per case, we are losing 117,000 US dollars. Now, if you convert that to rand, it comes to approximately 2 million rand per case lost. And that's about 5% of revenue for a company. So that is the extent of the problem that we know of in terms of employee fraud. You also mentioned what type of crimes are being committed when we refer to employee fraud. And employee fraud refers to fraud which is committed by an employee against the organization who employs this person. So there's basically three types of frauds. We're looking at asset misappropriation, and this is your typical fraud and theft cases where employee would load a false beneficiary on the account of the company, submit false disbursements, theft of cash. Then we're looking at corruption, and we don't have to give a further explanation and what happened in state capture and the evidence that was given at the Zondo Commission. And then financial statement fraud, over and understatement of financial statements. Now, just to give you an example for the viewers out there, so about employee fraud, a typical matter of employee fraud. Now, this is one of my matters, and it was recently in the court here in Cape Town, the Cape Town Regional Court, and the suspect was convicted and sentenced after a very long time, but it happened. So what she did was she worked at one company as the payroll manager, and she conveniently did away with a tax portion that she was liable, personal tax portion that she had to pay. Staff members would resign. She would keep them 3 months on the payroll and then divert the funds to her own personal bank account. And she also created ghost employees. When she was caught out and she was dismissed, we started an investigation. She went on and she worked at another company in the same role and position, and she did exactly the same. Now, so that's just an example.
Now, Christo, if we take that example, do you think that enough is being done to ensure that these employees don't do it again, like you said, at another company? Is there enough background checks being done on employees? Is it up to scratch?
Clearly, in this case, it was not. You know, that is, and if you ask what does companies need to do, I think before you start employing somebody, might do proper background checks. Check for criminal records and check with the previous employers what happened. Do the reference checks, do credit checks as well. So that is a very first important step when you appoint somebody.
Yeah. Now, Christo, would you then say this is more an opportunistic crime from the employee side, or is there an organized element in it as well?
Well, I say there's both. I mean, organized, if you see how state capture worked in South Africa, and if you followed the Zondo Commission and the evidence that was given, very organized, and then also opportunistic. Just to give you an example, and we've investigated several similar cases. Take an example, an employee he's the financial manager of a company. He received the invoices, he approved the invoices, he loaded the beneficiaries and he paid the beneficiaries. Now he gets into financial difficulty, or he develops an addiction problem of gambling. Because he's short of cash, and now he's in full control of that business, and he can easily load false beneficiaries and pay the funds over to his own personal bank account. That's all opportunistic.
So, Christo, how do we compare with the rest of the world? I know you mentioned earlier $117,000 per case, which is about 2 million rand, you said. But how do we compare to the rest of the world? Or is fraud something that's just prevalent everywhere?
It's everywhere. Let me tell you, I sit on the board of the International Association of Financial Crime Investigators in the US, and it is a global pandemic. It's not really any difference. It's a global pandemic.
Thank you so much for your time and your insights. That was Christo Snyman, the CEO of a forensic investigative services company, CS Forensics, during International Fraud Awareness Week.